The runner is alone on the salt flat, and the heat is a physical weight pressing down on her shoulders. Her lips have cracked, her tongue feels like paper. Every step throws up a puff of white dust, and the horizon shivers and folds in the glare. She has stopped sweating, and some distant part of her mind knows that this is the dangerous sign, the one that comes before the body starts to fail. She thinks she is running out of strength. She is wrong. She is running out of water, and with it, she is running out of the one thing that has kept every ancestor of hers alive since long before there were legs to run on. Her body is not drying out like a sponge. It is losing the sea it has carried inside it this whole time. We like to think of ourselves as solid, flesh and bone, something firm you could knock on. That is the story the mirror tells, and it is almost entirely a trick. Most of what you are is water, more water than anything else. So much that if you could somehow drain it away, what remained would be a thin, dry smudge, a handful of dust and salt. You are not a solid thing that holds some water. You are mostly water that has learned to hold a shape. And you were even more water once than you are now. A newborn is more watery than a grown adult, and a tiny embryo is more watery still, closer to the sea it came from. As a body ages, it slowly dries, the fraction of water quietly falling year by year, so that the old are, in a real sense, further from the ocean than the young. To grow up is partly to lose a little of the sea. To grow old is to lose a little more. The wettest you will ever be is at the very beginning, when you are still almost entirely fluid, still almost entirely ancient ocean, wearing the first hint of a human shape. And here is the part that should sit strangely with you as you swallow. The fluid inside you is not just any water. It is a faint, ancient copy of the sea, sealed inside your skin, carried around on land by a creature that never quite left the ocean behind. To understand why your body is mostly water, you cannot start with the human body at all. You have to rewind, past the first people, past the first animals that ever crawled onto land, all the way back to a warm and salty sea where nothing living had a skeleton, a face, or a single dry moment in its existence. So carry two questions down into deep time with you. Where did all this water in you actually come from? And why is it salty in the exact way it is? And once life finally hauled itself out onto dry land, why did it never manage to leave the water behind, but instead learn to wrap it up and take it along? Begin in the sea, because that is where you begin. Picture the early ocean, warm and shallow and rich with dissolved salts, lit by a young and violent sun. In that water, the first living things were not much more than tiny bubbles of film, thin bags holding a droplet of that same seawater inside. That was the whole trick of being alive back then. A boundary and a pocket of ocean held within it. Everything a cell did, every reaction that counted as living, happened in that trapped drop of sea. The water was not a container for life. The water was the room in which life happened. And this is the first thing that should stop you. Every chemical reaction that keeps you alive still happens exactly the same way, in water. Your cells are still those same tiny bags of salty fluid, only now there are a vast number of them, packed together into a body. Nothing about that ancient arrangement was ever replaced. It was only scaled up. When you think, when you heal, when you digest a meal, the actual work is being done by molecules drifting and colliding in water, in the very same kind of salty solution that filled the first cells in that early sea. You did not invent a new way of being alive. You inherited the oldest one there is. Stand for a moment in that early world, because it was nothing like ours. There was no green on the land, no bird song, no soil, only bare rock and a restless, salty sea under a sky thick with strange air. Storms lashed the shallows. Tides dragged warm water in and out of rocky basins where the salts grew concentrated and the chemistry grew busy. Life did not begin on a beach or a mountain. It began in the water, because water was the only place where the delicate business of living could hold together at all. Take a cell out of that sea, and it was not a creature anymore. It was a stain drying on a stone. But a droplet of sea in a bubble is a long way from a running human body, so the story has to move. Why did life stay so committed to water when so many other things about it changed beyond recognition? The answer is that water is the one thing life could never negotiate away. The delicate, folded shapes of the molecules that run a cell only work while surrounded by water. Take the water away, and they collapse, seize, and die. Life could change its size, its shape, its habits, its whole way of making a living. What it could not do was step out of the water, because the water was not a setting it lived in. It was part of the machinery itself. Think of what water actually does inside a living thing, though never as a dry list, always as a scene from that ancient sea. It carries. Every nutrient a cell needs arrives dissolved in water, drifting to where it is required. It dissolves. The salts and sugars and messengers of life only travel when they are broken loose and floated in fluid. It cushions and it steadies, holding a stubborn, even temperature while the world outside swings from scorching to freezing. In that first ocean, water was doing all of this for a single bubble of life. In you, it is doing exactly the same things. For a body made of a staggering number of bubbles, each one still needing the sea around it to survive. So life did something remarkable instead of leaving the sea. Roll the clock forward to the first animals with real bodies, made of countless cells pressed together. Now there was a problem the single cell never had. The cells on the inside were cut off from the ocean. They could no longer sit directly in the sea and soak up what they needed. And the solution was quietly astonishing. The body kept a portion of the sea on the inside, a salty fluid bathing every cell, an internal ocean flowing between them. The animal became a walking piece of the sea, with the sea now running through its own interior, feeding cells that could never again touch the real ocean outside. You can almost watch this happen if you look at the simplest sea animals still living. A jellyfish is little more than a thin sheet of cells wrapped around seawater. So much water that when it washes up on a beach, it all but vanishes as it dries, leaving barely a film behind. That is what the earliest bodies were. Bags of the sea, with just enough living tissue to hold the water in a useful shape. As bodies grew thicker and more complex, the trapped sea inside them became more precious, not less, because now whole populations of inner cells depended on that private ocean for every breath and every meal. The sea had moved indoors, and it could never be allowed to run dry. Here is where the pattern becomes personal, because that internal sea never went away. It is inside you right now, and it is called your blood plasma and the fluid around your cells. That fluid is salty, and not by accident. Its saltiness is a lingering echo of the ancient ocean in which animal life first took shape. When a doctor drips a salt solution into a vein to save a life, they are, in a sense, topping up a private sea, refilling the ancient fluid that every one of your cells still needs to sit in. You carry the ocean not as a memory, but as a working fluid, pumped through you with every heartbeat. And there is a moment in every human life when this is impossible to miss, though we rarely think of it that way. Before you were born, You did not breathe air. You floated. You spent your first months curled inside a warm, salty fluid, a small private sea held inside your mother, rocking in the dark. Every one of us begins life submerged, growing in water, exactly as our most distant ancestors lived out their entire existence. The first environment any human ever knows is not the land and not the air. It is a warm, enclosed ocean, and we only leave it at the very end, gasping, when we are finally born into the dry world. Even our beginning replays the sea. But this raises the real mystery, the one that turns a curiosity into something stranger. If life is so utterly bound to water, how did anything ever leave the ocean and survive on dry land, where the air itself steals water from every surface it touches? For most of the history of life, nothing did. The land was a lethal desert for anything made of wet cells, a place where a body would simply dry out and die within hours. And yet here you stand, on land, mostly water, perfectly fine. Something had to solve the impossible problem of carrying the sea across the dry world. To see how, we have to follow the detectives of deep time. The puzzle is sharper than it first looks. Consider the strangest clue of all. When animal life moved from the salty ocean into rivers and lakes, into fresh water, it faced the opposite danger. Now the water outside was too pure, too empty of salt, and it tried to flood into their salty bodies and burst their cells from within. The very animals that had fought to keep the sea from leaking out now had to fight to keep fresh water from rushing in. Same inheritance, opposite threat. Whatever solved this had to be able to hold the inner sea steady whether the world outside was too salty, too fresh, or trying to boil it away in dry air. Lay out the clues. The first creatures to survive on land did not find a way to live without water. That was never possible. Instead, they found ways to stop the water from escaping. A skin that sealed the sea inside instead of letting it evaporate. A way to breathe that did not dry out the body too fast. And most telling of all, an organ dedicated to guarding the internal ocean, deciding what to keep and what to release. That organ is your kidney, and its deepest job is not to make waste. Its job is to defend the sea inside you, to hold its saltiness steady, to keep the ancient fluid from becoming too thin or too concentrated. The kidney is a border guard for a private ocean. Picture it working through a single hot day. As you sweat and the inner sea grows too salty, the kidney claws water back, holding on to every drop. And a deep, insistent thirst rises to send you searching for a stream. Drink too much, and it lets the excess go, protecting the cells from being swamped. That thirst you feel is not a modern nuisance. It is one of the oldest alarms in the body, a signal that the private ocean is slipping out of balance, inherited from ancestors for whom finding water in time was the whole difference between living and drying out. When your mouth goes dry, an ancient sea is calling for the tide. And that is the button on the mystery. Life never conquered the land by becoming dry. It conquered the land by becoming a superb container for water, a sealed vessel that carries its own sea wherever it goes. Every creature walking, crawling, and flying across the dry world today is really a clever bottle of ancient ocean, wrapped in skin, guarded by kidneys, refilled by thirst. The land was not won by leaving the water. It was won by learning to smuggle the water out of the sea and never spill it. You are the proof, standing on dry ground, full of the sea. But smuggling the sea has never been free, and that is exactly why the trait can never fade. A body that carries its own ocean must guard it every single hour. It leaks the sea away as breath, as sweat, as every trip to empty the bladder, and it must find fresh water again and again or die within days. There was no cheaper design waiting to replace it, no way to run life on less water. Because the water is the life. So the demand never eased. It only followed us out of the ocean and onto the land. A debt paid daily, in every mouthful we drink, by every creature that ever left the sea. Look at the everyday signs, and they suddenly read like confessions. Your tears are salty, your sweat is salty. The fluid a doctor drips into your arm to keep you alive is salt water, mixed to a strength close to the sea. When you weep, when you bleed, when you sweat through a hot afternoon, what leaves your body tastes of the ocean, because it is a thin descendant of the ocean. We treat these as small, ordinary things. They are anything but. They are the sea inside you, briefly showing itself at the surface before you seal it back in. Now the whole picture comes together, and it reaches all the way back to that first salty droplet. The reason your body is mostly water is not that water is a convenient filler. It is that water was never a filler at all. It was the original home of life, the room where every living reaction first learned to happen, and it was never given up. As life grew from a single bubble into a body, it did not escape the water. It enclosed it. As life crawled onto land, it did not abandon the sea. It packaged it, sealed it, and carried it along. Every step of the way, the water stayed, because the water was the one part that could not be replaced without ending life itself. And here is where the runner comes back, alone on the salt flat with her cracked lips and her paper tongue. What is failing in her is not some modern weakness. It is the oldest vulnerability there is. Her body is a sealed piece of ancient ocean, and the desert is pulling that ocean out of her faster than she can replace it. Her thirst is not a small discomfort. It is a signal hundreds of millions of years deep, a cell-level alarm from an inheritance that began in the sea. When she finally drinks, and the water floods back into her tissues, she is not just quenching a craving. She is refilling the ancient sea inside her, the one she has carried since before her kind could stand. And notice what her body does in that first swallow. The water does not simply sit in her stomach. It is drawn into the blood, spread out among the cells, welcomed into the same salty fluid that has bathed living tissue since the first ocean. Within minutes, the private sea rises again. The alarm quiets. The machinery loosens and runs. She could not tell you any of this is happening. Her body has known it far longer than her kind has had a mind to wonder about it. So step back and feel the full reach of it. We began with a runner drying out under a merciless sun, sure she was losing her strength. We ended in a warm, early ocean, watching the first fragile bubbles of life hold a droplet of seawater inside a film. That fluid in you, the blood, the tears, the sweat, the sea around every cell, is the same kind of water, carried forward without a break through every ancestor between that first ocean and you. And it is not yours alone. The tree outside your window is mostly water. The dog at your feet, the bird overhead, the fish in the river. Every living thing you have ever seen is, beneath its surface, a vessel of water first, and everything else second. We are all of us the same in this, all descended from that first watery beginning, all still carrying the sea in whatever shape our lineage happened to take. The whole living world is water, dressed up in 1,000 different bodies. You are not a dry thing that drinks. You are a wet thing that remembers the sea in every cell. And here is what stays once you understand it. Your body is mostly water not by chance but by inheritance, because life was born in the sea and never found a way to leave it behind, only to carry it. That salty fluid moving through you is the oldest thing about you, older than bone, older than thought, a working piece of an ancient ocean kept alive inside a body that walks on land. Every time you drink, every time you cry, every time you sweat on a hot day, the sea inside you is doing exactly what it has always done, keeping the machinery of life running in the only medium it ever knew. So the next time you lift a glass of water to your lips, remember what you are really doing. Not filling an empty vessel, but refreshing a sea that has been flowing inside your lineage since life began. If that thought stays with you even a little, then stay with me. Your body is full of these deep inheritances, ancient things carried quietly into the present, and every one of them holds a story just as old and just as alive still as this one.